and welcome. You are listening to Cake Over Keto, your non-diet podcast that stands up against diet culture so you can make peace with food and your body and eat the goddamn cake without anxiety and guilt. If you struggle to stop thinking about eating, if you feel anxious or out of control around food and feel uncomfortable in your body, this is your safe space for the next 20-ish minutes. Free from assumptions and judgment, whatever your body shape and size. I'm Mel Wakeman, registered nutritionist, intuitive eating practitioner, non-diet counsellor, and lover of pancakes. And I specialise in disordered eating, recovering from chronic dieting, body dissatisfaction, and eating disorder recovery, all through a weight-inclusive lens. So come find me on social media as me, Mel Wakeman, and I share lots of free non-diet and healing content. Now this is episode 20 and the last episode of season 2. But don't worry, I'm coming back, and I've called this particular episode, We're Not Broken. I want to share another part of my story because I've had a recent and unexpected chapter pop up in my book that is called Life. And I think it's relevant to what I talk about on here on Cake Over Keto. Our mental and emotional health, our relationships with ourselves, feeling like we don't fit, like there's something wrong with us, and that quite possibly we're broken. Spoiler alert, you're not. So I'm going to tell you about my recent ADHD diagnosis and some of my reflections and realizations that can very much mirror the difficult journey of healing a difficult relationship with food. There will be a pick and mix at the end that will contain a handful of resources I found particularly helpful during this part of my journey, and the links for which will be in the show notes, which are below the play button. And as I head into a break from recording, I will be continuing this conversation when I return in season 3. Because I've been working with neurodiverse clients for a couple of years now, and having a brain that works differently can have huge implications on how food is seen and used and eaten. And right now I'm feeling somewhat grateful for my personal experiences of this, because there's nothing worse than working with someone who just doesn't get it. So I do get it. And I'm going to be coming back for more talk about eating with ADHD and autism spectrum disorder, ASD, because I also identify with autism. My diagnosis was specifically for ADHD, but I also screened and scored highly for autistic traits. So without further ado, let's get into this. ADHD stands for Attention Deficit Hyperactivity Disorder. I'm not keen on that disorder word, but anyway, you may well have a picture in your head of a loud, disruptive child bouncing off the walls. Well, that wasn't me at all. I was the quiet, shy one who said all her pleases and thank yous. I was a pleasure to teach and had so much potential, but was always a little bit disappointing, who felt awkward in the company of others, and so desperately wanted people to like me. So I copied their mannerisms. I said I liked the same music as they did, although I'd never heard it, because in reality, any form of rejection was crushing. I wanted to live in my Enid Blyton books, The Famous Five or Mallory Towers, and I tried so hard to fit in, but I never felt I did. And for such a long time, I felt a complete loss with who I was. And there was a big part of me that accepted this was normal. I mean, I didn't know any different, and perhaps it was just easier to believe there wasn't another way, because that implied there was something wrong with me. And I didn't ask anyone, because they might just say that I'm weird. There was a 3,200% rise in women who did an online screening for ADHD in the UK in the lockdown years between 2019 and 2021. I am now one of the many, many women who more recently have received a late diagnosis, because we didn't know back in the 70s or 80s or 90s that ADHD can show up very differently in girls compared to boys, because all the studies were done on young boys and not girls, and the idea of masking behaviours wasn't even a dot on a page. I did what I was told at school. I excelled in the subjects and with the teachers that I loved. And it was particularly geography and art, as well as biology, that I loved. Maths and English, not so much. I successfully navigated my favourite GCSE subjects, no idea how really, and then developed a restrictive eating disorder. I got obsessed with exercise. I never really considered it might be because my mind was so loud and critical all the time, and I felt out of control. I found problem solving hard, and if anything remotely boring required some serious thought, it was torture to get done. Yet give me a project that ticked my, that sounds fun box, and you'd have a hard time stopping me. My A-levels were really tough, as was uni. And I was told I was a hard worker so many times, and I did believe it myself. I mean, I worked so hard, but I also felt like I should always be doing more. My parents had no clue I was not doing my coursework or revision in my bedroom, and I was too ashamed to admit it. And of course, I didn't want to get into trouble for it like my brother did. I just didn't have much faith I would get where I wanted. And I didn't at the start, but to be fair, I've done bloody good. I'm very proud of my achievements, but there is a big but sitting with me at the moment. Like, how might things have been different? Anyway, through researching ADHD, I've come across many experts that suggested coming up with an analogy that describes to others what it's like to be in your head. Mine is a puppy rave. 100 yapping puppies having a full-on banging rave, maybe fun for the first 5 minutes, but then you can't find the off switch. So there's like 20 wanting to lick me to death, another 20 trying to drag me outside, 20 bouncing up and down, wanting me to pull their tugger rope, and 5 have just crapped on the floor. And I just want to go and have cuddles in the corner, but they're not tied enough yet. It is living in extremes. It's wanting stimulation, but easily being overstimulated. So things are often too loud and too bright and too scratchy and too cold. It's exhausting. If you're unfamiliar with ADHD, it's characterized into kind of different types. So there's an inattentive type, which for me shows up as terrible short-term memory. I lose my stuff all the time, and forgetfulness is a problem. I'm highly distractible, and I have difficulty starting tasks, especially in the morning, which means I stress, which reduces my capacity to get stuff done. I've seen this called procrastivity, this combination of procrastination activity by Attitude Mag. And that really resonated. I have a lot of trouble following multiple steps. So if I have instructions, if they're rules for games or recipes, I have to read them 50,000 times. And there is no point in giving me verbal directions to get somewhere because I've lost you after keep going down here. Patience is not my strongest quality. If I believe things need doing now, it's only now. There is no other time. And I have very little awareness of time. So I'm always late. And I think I can cram as much in 5 minutes as I can do in an hour. Next is impulsiveness. Combine this with being easily distracted, and it can mean trying to fix your Hoover results in you buying an earwax remover and some new socks. But seriously, impulse spending can be a problem, and it's been a problem for me, as was binge eating and emotional outbursts that can involve a lot of slamming unless you've got those really annoying slow close cupboard doors, because you get no satisfaction from that, and many lost thrown hairbrushes. Then there's hyperactive, which can be feeling kind of highly charged. And for me, I struggle to sit still, and it can look like I have loads of energy, but I don't usually. But it can also show up as emotional dysregulation. So kind of quite severe mood swings. It can also show up as self-harm and those impulsive behaviours again. And all of these have been me. So you might be able to see them overlapping, and the types can absolutely combine. And this is my experience. So I display many of these behaviours, but I also want to emphasise there is no set look for ADHD or any type of neurodiversity for that matter. And when I say display, for me, I often only display it in safe places, when I can take the mask off, or when I'm just exhausted and I can't take anymore. And one of the reasons so many women are being diagnosed late is because we've had to create piles and piles of coping strategies, which masks the stuff that we're dealing with. So we end up self-medicating in different ways, and some of those can be helpful, but a lot of them can turn out to be quite self-destructive. Which leads me to burnout. I've had cycle after cycle of burnout through my career. Not small ones, like 3 to 6 months off work type of burnouts. I couldn't understand why I didn't learn from these. And the only solution that made sense to me was, well, must try harder. Come on, fight through the exhaustion, keep going. Oh, look, here comes another burnout. It's one of the reasons I left my academic life and came to self-employment. Overwhelm and stress is something I've still not yet learned to manage effectively or sustainably. And I think it's because I've never had the chance to fully understand my go-to responses, my desires to distract, to try new things, to keep going, that all felt so compulsive. And I think I've been trapped in a perpetual cycle where stress has triggered or intensified my ADHD and autistic behaviours, not knowing that's what they were. And at the same time, living with ADHD and autism has probably caused me to be in a perpetual state of stress. Now, I'm not a neuroscientist, I'm certainly not an ADHD expert, but I've learned that neurodivergent brain is different. It develops differently, it's wired differently, it has different brain chemistry. And what we recognize are lower levels of the neurotransmitters or chemicals in our brain called dopamine and noradrenaline. And these chemicals affect our brain signaling and what's called executive function. This means how our brain organizes our thoughts and tasks. So it's things like learning how to manage time effectively, plan ahead, organize and get shit done. Stuff that I'm not very good at. Now, there have been 2 very notable peaks when my undiagnosed ADHD has caused me to lose sight of myself. Aside from very stressful periods, difficult times and burnouts, one that comes to mind was the birth of my son, some 11 years ago, and the other is right now. I am 49 and in the midst of perimenopause. My hormones are without a doubt taking me on a roller coaster ride. And many of the psychological symptoms of menopause can mirror those of ADHD. And I'm seeing now how perimenopause has become a trigger for my anxiety through my ADHD and possibly my autism. Now, there's a really useful guide to the links between ADHD and perimenopause that I'll share in the pick and mix at the end, and it's in the show notes. So estrogen and dopamine are linked. So when estrogen levels decline during perimenopause, dopamine functioning also declines. And I think this is what's led to my greater executive function challenges. And I reckon as well, when my estrogen levels dropped after me having my son and certainly stopping breastfeeding, my ADHD symptoms came back. They peaked. So I've been trying to navigate all of this over the last number of decades. And last year, my brain and body had had enough. My coping skills just weren't working. My mask kept falling off, and I just decided I needed help. So back in spring in 2022, it's not often I say this, but thanks to social media, I came across various ADHD accounts that made me stop and think. And yeah, there was a lot of kind of bullshit ones, I think. You know, we have to be careful about what we're looking at. But over those next few months last year, more and more symptoms resonated with me, and I really started to wonder if I was in the club. I was signposted to ADHD UK, their website, and their self-screening tool, which is about answering 18 questions, and I'll come back to this in the pick and mix. And it reported it might be highly likely my symptoms were conducive to ADHD. Now, I was not in a good place at that time, and I had booked an appointment after doing this screening tool with my GP to ask about increasing my antidepressants again, because I didn't know what to do. We were getting ready to move house. I had a lot of stuff going on at home with my wider family, and it led me to thinking, well, all this that I'm feeling is just because I'm stressed again, surely. Like, this is a lot. So I kind of mentioned ADHD, but very much danced around it, like, no, it won't be. But might my dreadful anxiety, forgetfulness, poor sleep, and feeling emotionally unhinged be my hormones? Is it a bad patch, or could it be this thing called ADHD? Which was met with an immediate no by my GP. You would have known at school, she said. You've become successful. You went to university. And of course, I felt completely stupid, agreed with her straight away, and off I went with more citalopram. But that question didn't go away. And after speaking to a couple of lovely colleagues and friends, watching some more videos, reading some books, my gut said, this could still be it. This could be why everything feels so hard all the time. I tried so hard to keep an open mind. It might be, but it might not be. Don't hang all your hopes on this. Don't count your chickens. But the thought of having to keep fighting and keep going, not knowing what was kind of wrong with me, was not something I could contemplate. I was in some quite dark places at times. I was exhausted from this enormous weight. I wanted it to be lifted from my shoulders, to find some bloody calm and peace in my head. But I had no idea how to do that. So in October last year, I decided to look into how to get assessed. The long waiting list terrified me, and I found out about the right to choose. The link is in the show notes. But I had this real sense of urgency to find out. I went back to the doctors, thankfully spoke to a different GP, and I floated this idea around again with him, and he listened. He asked me what I was experiencing. He asked me about the self-screening tool. He knew about the assessment pathways, and we talked about my options. And after looking at what I needed now, I said, I think I need to look into going private. And that's what happened. In January of this year, I was assessed. Now, I didn't come away with a definitive diagnosis of ADHD because of my past trauma and my current perimenopause. And because behavioural responses for ADHD are not exclusive, and because the DSM-5, the diagnostic tool for ADHD, has limitations. But I got a near as damn it yes. I was surprised I scored highly on the autism screening questionnaire. But then again, I wasn't. Now, screening tools are not diagnostic tools, but we talked about this quite a bit, me and my psychiatrist, in the assessment, and we think it's maybe likely I have autism too. They often coincide, and it would explain my anxiety, some of my sensory processing issues, my avoidance of social situations, and my strong need for order and control. I need things to be in their place. I need my mugs and my glasses, my tins to be stacked in a particular way. It's not OCD, but I think it points towards my past restrictive eating behaviours. And I'll do an episode about this. Realising I'm neurodivergent has been really freeing. It's brought a huge sense of relief. It's brought hope, at least for me, realising I'm not out of control or broken. For so many years, I've thought I'm too sensitive, too demanding, too much, and not good enough. But I'm me. And I'm still finding out about me. And I'm seeing this resounding strength and resilience within me. And I'm really proud of that. I now understand why some things have felt more difficult for me than I thought they should. And I think one of the biggest light bulb moments has been the frustration I have felt that I think has stemmed from me trying to force my neurodivergent brain to function in a neurotypical world. So for anyone listening who has felt they just didn't fit for whatever reason, I want you to know that you are not to blame, that there is space for you. You just kind of have to find it and find yourself. Now hang on for just a moment. I have a pick and mix coming up next, and I'm going to signpost you to some further resources that may help if you're wanting to learn more about ADHD in adulthood. Back in a minute. Right, I've got 3 nuggets for you in my pick and mix. The first one is a book called ADHD 2.0. It's by Edward Hallowell and John Ratey. It's a book that for me provided reassurance and hope through storytelling, but also really practical because the authors have lived experience of ADHD and they have been experts in this field for yonks. Hallowell's analogy of an ADHD brain is being like a turbocharged Ferrari, but with bicycle brakes. And that certainly struck a chord. Number 2 is ADHD UK. They are a charity at adhd.co.uk, and they have an incredible website of information and resources. I've attended a couple of their online support groups, and they offer really practical advice for living and working with ADHD. It's also where you can find the self-screening tool with steps as to what to do next after that. Number 3 is a comprehensive ADHD and menopause booklet from balancemenopause.com. You can download it. It's written by Dr. Louise Newson and Dr. Ruth Gibson, who also has ADHD. And what I found helpful was it takes you through the symptoms of ADHD that mirror those in menopause. So it helps you kind of understand how they can relate, and also offers advice for if you want to talk to your healthcare professional about managing your symptoms or want to explore treatment options. So that's it from me today, folks. Thank you for taking the time to listen today and for other episodes. All the links and resources I've mentioned in this episode will be in the show notes. And as I mentioned at the beginning, I'm now off for a wee break, but I will be back on the 21st of April with episode 21. Is ADHD affecting the way you eat? Because discerning hunger and fullness can be really hard for neurodivergent folk. Because of impulsivity, hyperfocus, and sensory issues, it can make what I call normal eating much more difficult. So come back for that. And of course, there are 20 past episodes of Cake Over Keto to keep you occupied until then. In the meantime, be gentle with yourself. Know that you are enough, always. And I'll see you next time. Bye.
This has been a Monkey Pants Productions podcast.